the Wranglers here today. It's wonderful to see all of you guys. I am Jackie, and I will be your tutor for these Read Together sessions. A little bit about me. If you haven't met me already, I am a writer and editor on Ringle's content team. I am an avid runner, eater, and reader. So I like to run, I like to eat, and I love to read. And for today's story of the day, I wanted to cover a little lesson on the importance of proofreading. So we're going to be covering a lot of very serious topics throughout the course of this read together session, right? We're dealing with the Holocaust. It's a very sort of, dark time in human history. And I actually took a class in college once about the Holocaust, and I wrote an essay for my professor. And in this essay, I was talking about a Nazi, a member of the Nazi party. And so we'll just use the name John Smith because I don't remember his name, but I wrote John Smith. What I was thinking I was writing was John Smith, comma, an aspiring Nazi, comma, blah, 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 right? So aspiring meaning like John Smith, someone who wanted to be a Nazi, right? But in my fast typing, I had accidentally typed John Smith, comma, an inspiring Nazi rather than aspiring Nazi. And so my professor read it, and later she was like, it could be problematic to describe a murderous Nazi as inspiring. And so message of the story here is to make sure you proofread your work and your emails before you send them out. So, all right. I'm super excited to be with all of you guys today. So I wanted to go through the agenda really quick here about what we'll be covering today, the way things will flow, and go from there. As you know, the first session is always just an orientation, getting you familiar with the main topics, the author, the book, as well as how the general sessions will flow going forward. So this is a little bit different than your traditional session. Nevertheless, you will have multiple opportunities to engage, to discuss, and to chat together. And hopefully it'll help you to grow as a reader and a learner. Right, so the first 20 minutes or so, we're going to talk a little bit about the book itself that we're going to be reading together, right? We'll talk a little bit about the author, a little bit about the historical context, some of the logistics behind things here and there. Then we're going to jump into a deeper read and digest. Give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek about how the story is going to start so we can get you hopefully excited to read this book. And then for a brief 5 minutes, we'll be doing guided reading questions. We'll be talking you through sort of the philosophy of the reading questions. And these questions are really designed to sort of help keep you focused throughout the course of each webinar, right? And then finally, we will have the reading tips and wrap up, right? Just for this session, I've compiled a few little reading tips to keep you guys engaged and excited about the readings before we wrap it up for the day. So hopefully you are as excited as I am. So yeah, starting with the about the book here, we are going to jump right into it. All right, so the author, Eddie Jaku, and we have a little lovely picture for you to look at, right? He was born in Germany and always identified as German before Jew, right? That was until he got sent to a concentration camp. So this piece is his first book, right? A Happiest Man on Earth. It is a memoir, which was published as he turned 100 years old. Unfortunately, he did pass in October 12th of 2021, age 101 years of age. Right. He's given a TEDx account on being a concentration camp survivor, and he's also done a lot of work with Sydney's Jewish Museum, where he shared a lot of his firsthand experiences in concentration camps. So he's someone who really has had all of the experiences and is eager to share them with you guys. So a little snippet here from his TEDx talk that I thought could be valuable to share with everyone. I'm going to take a moment to read through it with you guys and then go through some useful vocabulary here. I wonder how people exist without friendship, without people to share their secrets, hopes, and dreams, to share good fortune or sad losses. In the sweetness of friendship, let there be laughter and sharing of pleasure, good times made better and bad times forgotten. When I remember that I should have died a miserable death, but instead I'm alive, so I aim to help people who are down. I was at the bottom of the pit, so if I can make one miserable person smile, I'm happy. Right. So Eddie Jaku is very much an inspirational speaker, and his story will be a story of inspiration as well. But a few notes of vocab here: sweetness of friendship, right? The word sweetness there is not to be taken literally, but rather it describes the wonder of friendship, the strength of friendship, and how helpful it can be, right? And then as well as was at the bottom of the pit, right? It's sort of a metaphorical reference to being very, very low in life in a very difficult, dark situation. And obviously, it's not always literally bottom of the pit, but in his case, it was so bad that, I'm sure there were times when he was really in a very dark, literally dark place. So, some useful terms there to keep in mind. I mentioned earlier that there's going to be a lot of dark history that we are going to be moving through in the course, excuse me, in the course of this reading and in the course of our conversations. Just to give you guys a little bit of context for the story, if you are not aware of the historical background, Nazi Germany and the period of World War II established thousands of concentration camps in Europe, right? These concentration camps were basically death camps used for slave labor, used for medical experimentation, murder, and a lot of terrible things to people that were deemed unfit for society, right? What kind of people were deemed unfit for society by Adolf Hitler's standards, who was sort of in the lead at this time? Primarily the Jewish people, right? Jewish people being a faith as well as an ethnicity. In the case of Eddie Jaku, our writer, he was a Jewish fellow, but there were more people than Jews that were also sent to the camp, right? There were a lot of gypsies that were deemed unworthy. Homosexuals were deemed unworthy. A lot of groups that were not really, fitting into society, they decided were sent to these camps. Two were very, very notorious, right, for the amount of murder or for another reason. And those two are Auschwitz and Dachau, right? Auschwitz and Dachau. Auschwitz, there's 1.3 million people sent to the camp, of which 1.1 million will have died, right? And I think it's known for having the slogan at the top that says like "Work makes you free." And then the other one is Dachau, right, which was the first camp set by the Nazis and as well as the longest running. And so these are so notorious that they've sort of established, they sort of have their own place within our culture. Like people are generally familiar with the camps. All right. So keeping that history in mind, I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of the book, right? The book is a memoir, right? Memoir. What is a memoir? A memoir is a nonfiction narrative, right? Based on one's author's own experiences, right? So we typically have four main types, structures, excuse me, that will come up in memoirs, right? We have the flashback, where a storyteller kind of jumps back and forth in time. We have the chronological memoir, where the writing just kind of goes in order from, past to present. We have the themed memoir, which is a memoir covering a specific sort of theme that interlinks these ideas. And then you have the overcoming, right? A memoir focused on one's specific struggle. In our case, I'm going to talk about it, but it's mainly chronological as well as sort of overcoming. That's the main sort of focus of this sort of memoir that we're going on. One little food for thought. How is memoir different from autobiography? I'm sure you've heard autobiographies, right? Very small difference here, right? Memoirs tend to be more narrative in nature, story-like in nature. Obviously, it's true, it's nonfiction, but it's more story-like, whereas autobiographies tend to be more a recollection of facts and details, right? So if you think your life is worth sharing, think about writing a memoir, perhaps, Anyone can write a memoir about their life. So taking a moment now to do a deep dive into the structure of the book, right? It goes in chronological order, as I mentioned, meaning it goes in order in time, right? Eddie starts by summarizing his childhood very briefly, detailing a little bit about his familial experiences, his upbringing, what that was like, his identity. And then the book focuses on when he's sent to these concentration camps where he endures unspeakable evils, handles torture, but ultimately survives, right? So the story then is one of survival, of how he gets through some really, really dark times. Here are some of the major themes as well I wanted to list out in terms of lessons that we'll cover throughout the book and that we'll get to talk about in the coming webinar sessions, right? The book covers trauma and pain. He talks a lot about the trauma, about the suffering, but as well as how he overcomes it. The power of hope. Hope is a recurring lesson, I think, in a lot of these stories, how you have to use hope. The power of friendship. He talks a lot about friendship in his original TEDx conversation, right? He talks about the power of stories, the importance of writing, how writing your stories can be a way to move on. He talks about forgiveness and resentment, right? What role forgiveness plays in moving forward, right? He talks a little bit about Adolf Hitler's birthday, the significance of that date in his life, and you'll have to read more to find out. He talks about reconciliation. Reconciliation meaning how you can come to terms with some of the things that happened in your life. And then finally, he talks about family. He talks about how he goes on to make a family and the role that children play in sort of dealing with his trauma and what he believes, how he believes one should raise children. Why did we choose this book, right? We choose the books for a variety of reasons for here on Ringo's platform and in this memoir, mainly because it's an uplifting story. It is a beautiful story about a very, very dark time in human history, right? He talks specifically about his own experiences, how he overcomes, and Jaku's story really, really, really does motivate. It truly can touch the soul, right? And of course, more generally, we also chose this because the text is very straightforward. It's not very like typical literature. It's free of metaphor. It's easy to understand, and the vocabulary is very straightforward. Jaku does not dress up any of his talk. He's very sort of plain and simple when he gives off his message. If not, let's move forward into our read and digest sneak peek. All right. So, what is the goal of Read and Digest? What is Read and Digest, right? Read and Digest is where we take selected passages from the book, we read it together, and we jump into a deep dive on expressions, right? So, with the goal of Read and Digest, we're going to be working with you on learning new expressions in context, understanding the nuances of these expressions, and then ultimately just building good habits for reading, picking up expressions, picking up literary techniques. Throughout the course of each webinar, each live lecture, I'm going to choose 3 or so key passages from the reading, looking deeper into these 2 different kinds of highlights. We have the yellow highlights, where we're talking about the key expressions and their nuances, how they can use to convey meaning in sentences. And then the purple, where we're going to do more analyses, right? We're going to look at literary things, literary devices and techniques to uncover the themes of the story, to analyze the text, to help you to elevate your own writing as well, right? And this can be helpful as well for just building your language skills. Of course, to start us off in this orientation for our little mini read and digest, I chose chapter 1, page 1, very beginning of the story to get you excited, hopefully, as a sneak peek as well, right? In the chapters, there are many things more precious than money. And in the very opening of our story, Jaku shares a little bit about how his early life progressed. He details a bit about his family as well as how his family relates to their faith and their country. So go ahead and join me, or if you have the book, you can go ahead and open up to that page. I was born in 1920 in a city called Leipzig in Eastern Germany. My name was Abraham Salomon Jakubowicz, but friends called me Adi for short. In English, the name is pronounced Eddie, so please call me Eddie, my friend. We were a loving family, a big family. My father, Isidore, had 4 brothers and 3 sisters, and my mom, Lena, was one of 13 children. Imagine the strength of my grandmother, who raised so many children. She lost a son in the First World War, a Jew who sacrificed his life for Germany, as well as her husband, my grandfather, an army chaplain who never returned from the war. My father was as proud a German citizen as could be, an immigrant from Poland who settled in Germany. He first left Poland as an apprentice in fine mechanical engineering for typewriter manufacturer Remington. Because he spoke good German, he made his way to America, working on a German merchant ship. He excelled in his trade in America, but missed his family, and decided to travel back to Europe to visit on another German merchant ship, arriving just in time to be caught in the First World War. Because he was traveling on a Polish passport, he was interned by the Germans as an illegal alien. However, the German government recognized that he was a skilled mechanic and allowed him to leave internment to work in a factory in Leipzig, making heavy weapons for the war effort. In this time, he fell in love with my mother Lena and with Germany and stayed after the war. He opened a factory in Leipzig, married my mother, and soon I was born. 2 years later, we welcomed my little sister Johanna into the world. We called her Henny for short. So a lot of sort of foundational story setting for the narrative. And I hope you've noticed already, this story is not hard to read, right? It's very straightforward. A few little expressions here that we've highlighted. People call me, right? Friends called me Adi. People call me Adi. It's a useful expression if you'd like to be addressed by some nickname, right? If you're like, oh, my name is Lindowitz, but people call me Lynn for short, or people call me Lynn, right? It suggests informality, right? Personal familiarity or some part of identity, right? So it's something you can use with friends if you want. Next up here, Eddie says, please call me Eddie, my friend, right? Immediately breaking that fourth wall, speaking directly to the reader. It creates a sense of intimacy with the reader, right? Because he's talking directly to you. And in writing and in sort of art, it's a technique you might notice called breaking the fourth wall, right? Speaking directly to the reader. Notice here as well his little intertwining of notes, right? The strength of my grandmother who raised so many children, using his personal commentary, adding to his unique tale, right? He also tries to do this to strengthen the bond that the author is sharing with the reader, right? And it is a very neat comment as well. You'll notice very early on in the story, he starts giving context to a lot of Jewish sacrifice, right? So he says, she lost a son in the First World War, a Jew who sacrificed his life for Germany, right? He's giving these context to these Jewish sacrifices for a country that didn't seem to support them, right? And it acts as foreshadowing in the story, right? We're going to get to see how it unfolds as you keep reading. He mentions that the grandfather was an army chaplain, right? What is an army chaplain? It's a clergy member who serves in the military, giving the spiritual support, the counseling, and religious services to military personnel. So it's not a fighting role, right? It's truly just for guidance, for comfort, and sort of religious assistance of any nature to soldiers and to families. My father was as proud a German citizen, he says, right? And so what is he doing here? It's a little bit more of foreshadowing, setting the scene for the unfair treatment that is going to happen, right? And the sentence sort of lays the groundwork for those deeper themes that we're going to talk about, right? About identity, right? Being a German citizen, about family belonging, and for the conflicts that exist within these themes. Next, apprentice, right? So his father left Poland as an apprentice. What is an apprentice? An apprentice is a person who is learning a trade, learning a craft or a profession under the guidance and supervision of a skilled mentor, right? So you could say, I am an apprentice in toilet building. I don't know why I said toilet building, but I am an apprentice in this art, in this skill, right? So you're still learning. You're learning under someone, right? So apprenticeships involve a combination of a lot of that practical training and education, right? So it's a little bit slightly different from student. Student is not always where you have a guidance of a mentor. Apprentice, you always have a mentor working above you. Okay. Next up, because he was traveling on a Polish passport, he was interned by the Germans as an illegal alien, right? What is an illegal alien? And this term can be a little more, be careful about how you use the term, I guess, is what I would say, right? So it refers to a foreign national residing in a country without proper authorization or legal status, right? And it's a very sort of, it feels a little dehumanizing, I would say, right? And this may be my very oversensitive American perspective, but in the US we tend not to, we wouldn't be like, oh, you're an illegal alien. So be careful about how you describe people this way. And in this context, right, Eddie's father is considered an illegal alien because of the lack of passport. But not because he doesn't have a passport, but because of the wartime considerations, right? The wartime circumstances that we're dealing with, right? And so I would say that right nowadays in the US, we might describe someone who's an illegal alien as perhaps someone who's undocumented, right? Of undocumented status. You might say, oh, this person is undocumented or is an undocumented immigrant, even rather than illegal alien. Sounds a little bit like harsh. So that's something to keep in mind. All right. This next sentence, right? He mentions that the father is working to make heavy weapons for the war effort. In this case, when we talk about efforts, we're talking about a collective of organized actions, resources, and contributions to reach a common goal, right? So in this particular sentence, it's talking about the production of heavy weapons for the war, right? The war effort. The goal of the effort relates to the war in this case, right? But you could sort of use effort in other senses, right? It's being like, oh, the collective effort to start a fire, right? So we all had a collective effort to start a fire, right? So because we were all working to like move the sticks and build that fire, or there was a team effort in moving the car. We all had to get together as a team and push the car forward because the car was not working. All right, in this next sentence, in this time, he fell in love with my mother, Lena, and with Germany, stayed after the war. So Eddie now is giving context for where his family is, comes from, right? And he does this in order to help establish the cast of characters within the family story. And then he sets the stage for further developments as things are going to go on, right? He introduces his sister, introduces his parents. Let us move forward into the guided reading questions. So, what are the guided reading questions, right? The goal of guided reading questions here are to help you focus your reading on the important material. It helps you to reflect and summarize those key plot points, also to help you build that linguistic understanding, right? So after each lecture, at the very sort of close, I'm going to be sharing some of these guided reading questions, right? And throughout the subsequent lecture, we're going to take a look at the guided reading questions together, some of those answers, right? And so between then and now, until the next week's lecture, what I want you to do is read your assigned portion of the book, right? Number one. Then number two, reflect on those guided questions, right? Think about those answers. You can read the answers before you can read the questions before you read the assigned portion if you really want, right? But reflect on those guided questions. And then finally, you can share their answers with me through the Google Forms, right? Share those answers, write them up, and then we are going to look at them together because I think they will help in the course of reading. All right, so guided reading questions for week 2. So we're going to go through some of the quick questions that I want you guys to think about as we go through the reading. And remember that the goal of these questions, some of them are more plot driven. Some of them are just like, oh, did you understand the session? So it could be simple, right? And then others are going to sort of have a deeper dive and a little bit more of a sort of context for you to think on, right? So number 1, why do you think people tend to obey authority? Why do we think people tend to obey authority, right? This is a bigger question, of course. Number two, what do you think of Eddie's experiences thus far? You're going to be reading a big chunk of Eddie's life going on so far. What do you think of the experiences that he has had, right? Number three, what can we learn from our experiences of World War II, right? Lots have happened during the course of World War II. What can we learn from these experiences? And then finally, what do you want to pass on to your children? If you have children, what messages, what stories do you personally want to pass on to them? A lot of opportunities for you to reflect here. All right. Finally, in the last 10, 15 minutes or so of the session, I wanted to talk through some unique and special curated reading tips and wrap up for all of you guys, right? The first is that classic question people are always asking, why read books to learn English? Why read, right? Reading is wonderful, right? And reading is an excellent way to master a new language, okay? So books provide exposure to the authentic use of language, right? They give you diverse vocabulary. They use idiomatic expressions and grammatical structure. Sometimes there's metaphor as well thrown in there. In this case, there's not too much metaphor, but they introduce you to sort of common language as it's used, and it helps learners to develop that natural and nuanced understanding of the language, getting familiar with the sound of the language, right? Reading memoirs, of course, can help you yourself to reflect on the going-ons of your own day-to-day, but more generally help you to describe what's happening in life, right? And that's also a useful skill. Sometimes you need to be like, oh, this is what happened yesterday, right? And so this will give you some of that sort of vocabulary in order to sort of build on mastering your mastery of English. Of course, remember, read for pleasure, right? Reading shouldn't be a painful, thing that you're like, oh, I have to read. Books should be for your pleasure. There are so many books. There's no doubt you can find a category, a subsection, a genre, be it memoir, fiction, nonfiction, that appeals to you, right? Poetry, whatever. If you run into those unknown words, if you run into tricky vocabulary, pause. Don't go straight to the dictionary. Dictionaries are your friend, but please let them be a last resort, right? What do I mean by that? What do I mean by let them be your last resort? First, try to use context clues to infer what a word means. So read a sentence again. If I don't know what a word means, right? Instead, try using context clues to infer what the words mean. See if I can guess what the word means and keep reading. I promise if you do enough reading, this will be a much more like natural way in order to sort of like, integrate that vocabulary, right? And I will walk you through sort of the best ways to do this throughout the course of the month. How do we approach unknown vocabulary then, right? A little deeper dive, right? If you run into this word that you're not familiar with or an unfamiliar piece of vocabulary, don't go to look it up, right? So again, here are the steps that I would recommend taking as we approach the unknown, right? Number one, guess. Just take a guess, right? And then number two, using those context clues, take another guess, right? Number three, ignore it. Actually ignore the word and see if you can still understand the passage. I know this seems a little crazy, but ignoring the word, if the passage still makes sense, you can go on, right? Don't let it stop you constantly. Obviously, if you don't know like 7 words in a sentence, okay, you have problems. But if it's just one word, then ignore it and see if you can still understand it. And then finally, if you still can't understand, then you're allowed to use the dictionary. Only then, after all of the steps. So let's do a quick example together. If you joined me, you might have seen this example already, but we're going to try it real quick and it could be fun, right? So let's try to draw up something that's approach. A melange is the word. You probably see melange not super, super commonly in your day-to-day, right? So our first sentence we have here, number one, the melange of fruits and vegetables was a reassuring testament to the fact that the kitchen was well stocked. The melange of fruit and vegetables was a reassuring testament, to the fact that the kitchen was well stocked. The students at Ringle's webinar represented A melange of countries from across the world. Hmm. Hmm. Okay. So let's take a guess, right? Number one, what might melange mean here? The melange of fruits and vegetables. Okay. A melange of countries. Okay, let's use the context clues and let's guess again. Yeah, someone's saying variety. Perfect. Is it related to food, to countries? Oh, people are saying lots, mix. Okay, okay. So let's ignore it and see if we can still understand the passage, right? The fruits and vegetables were a reassuring testament to the fact the kitchen was well stocked. That still makes sense, right? Second one, students at Ringgold's Webinar represented countries from across the world. Still makes sense, right? So we understand it without that. So our guess here is that it means mix, even if we're not sure, right? We're still able to understand the passage, right? So mix, varying, diverse mix. And finally, only after all of that, if you still can't understand, do you go to the dictionary, right? So what does melange means? Excellent, everyone. A mixture. A mixture or a group of different things or different people. In this case, the first sentence describes fruits and vegetables, and the second sentence it describes countries around the world. Combination, varying, mixed, variety. Every one of you guys got it right. Appreciate all of you joining me today. Looking forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you all so much.